My name is Robert Meyer Burnett, and you are about to listen to a Sunset Sea production. I'll send you my bill in $10.99.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Coffee with Holden. Today we're going to be talking about another pre-code Hollywood movie. This time it's one called Klondike from 1932, and it was made in the same year as the one we covered last time, which was called Uptown New York. So without much further ado, let's start off the review with a brief summary of what it was that actually happened in Klondike. So in Klondike, there's this doctor. There's basically, the movie's about this doctor in New York named Cromwell, right, who performs an experimental operation of sorts, a surgery on a high-profile client of his. The client is an old man who is deep into his condition, and he ends up dying from the operation. And so Cromwell, because of that, he somehow takes a lot of the blame, and he has his medical license, even though he's cleared of all charges. He's cleared of murder. There's a trial for it. He's cleared of murder, but he loses his medical license in the process. It gets revoked, and all of his other clients lose faith in him and leave. And so when he goes into his office one day, there's this woman, a woman with a broken arm, pays him a visit. She's the only client that he has that hasn't walked out on him, right? And the two of them get into a bit of a conversation about the situation, about what happened. And he reveals to her some of the details of the operation, talks about his side of the story, and it proves him innocent, right? And the woman with the broken arm from there, after kind of getting the innocence out of him, right? After being convinced of his innocence, she reveals that she's actually not a patient; she's a journalist, and that her arm wasn't broken. She just used that as a pretext, as an excuse to interview him and get the scoop, get an exclusive, right? And she runs out of the office in shame, and the experience makes Cromwell realize that his old life is over. Just how big this failure is for him, and just how difficult it will be for him to come back. He's not going to be able to come back to medicine, certainly, after this. Basically, everything's over. It's ruined, right? It's done. And so, feeling desperate, he opens the top drawer of his desk, and inside is a pistol. So he opens the top drawer of his desk. There's a pistol inside, and he contemplates suicide by gunshot for a moment, right? But decides that would be a little too obvious, a little too overt. Instead, he in addition to being a surgeon, a well-known, prominent, influential, and also just a highly regarded surgeon, Cromwell is also interested in flying, right? And he has been working on on earning his private pilot's license for quite some time, right? So his instructor is this man named Evans, who lost most of his teeth in a flying incident. That's the person who teaches him. They're friends as well. And so Evans and Cromwell are close. And so Cromwell decides to visit the flight school and go for just the flight school to get another lesson for his license. He's very close to earning it. Right, and he shows up, and he and Evans, they get into a little conversation as they're preparing for the next lesson, and Evans ends up telling Cromwell about an older, more broken down plane that's in the lot, because Cromwell basically has the best plane in the lot, right? His is all nice and upgraded and overhauled and everything. Like it flies well, it's reliable, you can trust it. But then there's this plane on the lot that some people try to they like to take it out in the hopes that flying it will kill them. They basically fly it as a way to kill them, like try to attempt suicide without making it too obvious, so that they can still have the reputation, to make it look like an accident, right? So even if they survive or whatever, and also just to make it to the because when you commit suicide, not to get like too heavy about this, obviously, but when you do it, I'm sure it creates all sorts of problems for the family and for your friends and everything, and it tarnishes your own legacy and your own reputation and stuff. So it makes sense that some people who might be desperate enough to attempt to do something like that to themselves would try to find an excuse, try to find some sort of pretext to soften the blow at least a little more, and maybe prevent some of those long-term consequences from occurring to the people around them, the people they know, and even to themselves to a certain extent, right? The legacy, how people will remember them, how the world will remember them, and all that. It's probably better to go out as the victim of a tragic plane crash than it is to go out as just someone who was in such a desperate state of mind that they took such a drastic measure as to end their own life, and so on and so forth. And of course, some people see that as a cowardly thing. Some people see that as a selfish thing. It just depends on the person, and it's a very controversial sort of topic. But yeah, I mean, it is touched upon in this movie from 1932, which probably does, of course, again, it makes you know that this is very clearly a pre-code Hollywood movie. It's not sanitized. There's no Hays Code, I guess, limitations here at all. Really, you can talk about something like this. You can have a movie that covers themes like this that are pretty dark and off-putting to at least certain audiences, right? But yeah, it's here. It's all here. So that's interesting, right? But yeah, so from there, Evans is talking to Cromwell. He's telling him about this flying coffin that people like to take out, and Cromwell basically tries to convince Evans that he wants to fly this plane instead of the plane that he usually flies, which is a lot better. And Evans is confused. He's like, "Why do you want to fly this plane that's very super dangerous?" And Cromwell tries to pass it off as him just wanting to challenge himself and wanting to prove that he can fly even a difficult plane, just to make sure that he's actually qualified to have this license and all that. He tries to pass it off as a story about that, but Evans knows about the situation with the client and everything, and he tells, so to try to cheer Cromwell up, Evans tells Cromwell a story about how back in the day, actually, Evans accidentally killed a man during a flight show when he was a performer, like a pilot, performer pilot or whatever you want to call it. He killed a man. He killed another person during it, just accident, right? But he was able to move past that. He was able to get over it because he kept pursuing his flying and actually ended up winning medals for his various performances as an entertainment flyer, or however you would want to describe that, right? A performance flyer, right? A performance pilot. So he was able to move on, even though that was something that probably would have ended a career or a life, really. Well, it did end a life, but it probably would have ended his life as well had he not been able to get over it, right? And so Cromwell, he's inspired by this, and Evans decides to it pulls him out of himself a little bit, but then Evans follows that up by inviting Cromwell to actually go on a flight that he plans to take to Tokyo. And Cromwell agrees to be his navigator. He wants to start a new life in Japan, and the two of them set off to do that, right? However, during the flight, the winds end up blowing the plane. The wind that they're experiencing, a lot of like heavy wind, right? And it actually pushes the plane further north than they would have wanted to go, and so they're actually closer to Canada than they are they're closer to they're up north. They're near Canada. They're above Canada now when they should be probably over the ocean or something. They should be on the way to Japan, but they're not. And the iciness of the clouds at the high altitude the plane is flying at, they prove to be dangerous. And because Evans didn't expect them, because they're just so far off course, and I guess because Cromwell is a terrible navigator in that sense, Evans ends up losing control, and the plane crashes in the middle of Alaska in the Klondike mountain range, right? And Evans dies, but Cromwell manages to survive, and he escapes the plane and collapses by a tree. And a local man on a dog sled finds him and takes him to a nearby trading post, right? And the trading post it's run by a man called Mark, right? Who has a son named Jim. So Mark has a son named Jim who has the same condition as the client that Cromwell accidentally killed, right? And so Jim is this brilliant inventor who actually created the first and only radio in the area, or not really the only radio, but it's like the best radio in that very rural part of Alaska, right? And he invented that, but because of his condition, he can now no longer work in his lab / basement workshop. So he can't do anything anymore. He's confined to a wheelchair and will die in about 6 months to a year if the condition continues to get worse, if it goes untreated, right? So yeah. Jim is also engaged to a woman named Klondike, who grew up with him and sees him as more of a brother than an actual lover. Because they grew up, they spent their childhoods together, and it's a local thing that when people who are the same age of the opposite sex get to a certain point in life, they should probably marry each other. It's just a local thing, So they're really only getting married because it would make sense for them to, and because there was never really an alternative that presented itself up until now. Let's say up until Cromwell shows up at the trading post, and of course it embodies that, sort of represents that alternative, that second possibility, right? And so Cromwell is brought to the trading post, and Klondike, who is named after her name is Klondike. She's named after the mountains, so she's Klondike in the Klondike. It's not super confusing because she's the only character named Klondike, and it's not that big a deal. So the female lead, the love interest, is Klondike, and she helps Cromwell to recover. She takes care of him, looks after him, and all that. And while Cromwell is there, at first, everyone at the trading post and in the area, they all believe that Cromwell is actually Evans. They think Evans is Cromwell, and that he's dead, right? And that Cromwell is Evans, if that makes sense. But this isn't a thing that's explored further, and we'll get into all of that after the summary, right? But they basically think that they mix the two of them up, and nothing really comes of it, but they do it anyway. So there you go. So after they establish that the people in the trading post confused the two of them, pretty much 5 minutes later, they forget that, and Cromwell is just called Cromwell. Everyone knows Cromwell is Cromwell, and so I don't really know why they put it in there, but that's part of the script. So now it's part of the story. So I had to bring it up. Sorry if it's confusing, but they're the ones who made it confusing, not me, right? But yeah. Anyway, not that it's that big of a deal or anything, but yeah. So Cromwell makes a full recovery at the trading post and spends some time getting to know Klondike. The two of them go well together. They hit it off very well. But Mark notices this. He walks past them as they're playing checkers and laughing together and being very close like that, right? Very close kind of overnight. And he picks up on that. And so he tries to use it against Cromwell later on, right? And so Mark takes Cromwell down to Jim's basement laboratory / workshop where he does all of his inventing and experimentation and everything. And Mark, while they're in there, Mark asks Cromwell to basically perform the operation on Jim. And Cromwell is hesitant to do this because he's actually no longer legally allowed to practice surgery after getting his license revoked. So if Jim were to die, if Jim were to die, Cromwell would be considered a murderer. That would be considered murder because he's not legally allowed to do something like that, right? So, yeah. However, he knows that he would be able to save Jim if he was legally allowed to practice, right? And Mark accuses him, and Mark actually takes advantage of this. He uses this as a way to accuse Cromwell, basically, of not wanting to do the operation so that he can have Klondike all to himself. It's pretty dark, right? But he basically tells Cromwell straight up that he's like, oh, I think you just want to steal Jim's girl, basically. Let Jim die so that he's out of the picture. There's no competition, and that way you can sweep up Klondike and have that all to yourself, and you can win 100%. So yeah, Cromwell denies this, and but later on, Mark basically pulls Klondike herself to the side and asks her to try to convince Cromwell to do it, and she does. She talks to him, and it works. And so Cromwell gives in and agrees to operate on Jim, and he does, and it works. It goes well. It's a success. And but as Jim is cured, right? But as he's recovering in his room, Cromwell gets into a conversation with Mark's friend, who is the same sledder who rescued Cromwell after his plane crash. He was the man in the dog sled from before, right? They get to talking for a bit, and Mark's friend tells Cromwell that now that Jim is healthy again, Cromwell will be able to go after Klondike without it being a big deal or anything, without being it being some sort of scandal because it's a fair game now, basically, right? And the best man will win because they're both healthy. So yeah, and this letter, by talking to him about this, he reveals that he approves of Cromwell more than he does Jim. But as they're talking about this, Jim wakes up, he hears all of it, and then pretends to still be sick in order to keep Cromwell from stealing away Klondike, right? Jim pretends to be mute, he pretends that he can't speak, and he pretends to be crippled still. He stays in the wheelchair and everything, even though he's perfectly healthy, capable of doing whatever he wants. And, he's just doing it so that it won't be a fair game, and so that Cromwell will be less likely to take Klondike away from him, even though it's probably clear that Klondike doesn't like him very much. Otherwise it wouldn't be a question, right? At least that's the idea. Let me just take a drink of water real quick. Sorry. It's good. I've been thirsty for an hour, but I haven't drank for some reason because I was watching the movie and I didn't feel like getting up to get another glass to refill my glass of water. So yeah. Anyway, so the radio, this fancy radio that Jim invented, that's like the best in the region or whatever. It broadcasts updates on Cromwell's controversy back in New York because it picks up radio signals from the mainland USA, right? And so, yeah, it turns out that Cromwell's dead client's wife, from one of these updates on his story, we learned that the dead client's wife, Mrs. Turner, was actually arrested for murder, and that she has testified. She's testified that she and Cromwell conspired to kill her husband and used the operation as cover, as a pretext for that, right? Like, let's cover it up as a botched operation, but I will pay you extra money to kill my husband. Basically, that's what she's saying to the authorities. And so Cromwell, after hearing this, obviously he rushes. He gets up. He rushes to try to return to New York in order to clear his name and to avoid being accused of hiding in Alaska and not just recovering from the plane crash or whatever. Right? He doesn't want people to think. He doesn't want to. That'll incriminate him. Right? That would condemn him if people thought that he was hiding out instead of showing up, right? So he has to go back to New York to have even a chance of being exonerated. But yeah, he decides to go. He's resolute about leaving. He gets up to go and pack, and this leaves Klondike heartbroken. She's very upset about this, which is another sign, of course, that she and Jim probably aren't the best fit for each other. So yeah. But so as Cromwell is packing in his room, he decides to pay a visit to Jim, check on him one more time, because he wrote down in his notebook, he has his doctor's notes, right? He wrote that Jim, even though he doesn't talk, he murmurs in his sleep, right? And this is obviously because Jim's bullshitting. He's not really mute at all. But and so when he's asleep, he gives that away. When he's unconscious, he's not able to keep the act up, right? And Cromwell thinks this is suspicious because, of course, the operation that he gave, it was on a part of the brain that had nothing to do with speech. It wasn't the part of the brain that deals with speech. It was the part of the brain that deals with, like, I guess, paralysis, because the condition involves being paralyzed, right? Like one of your arms kind of shrivels up and clings to your chest, and so that's what Cromwell fixed. But it has the operation itself. It had nothing to do. It had absolutely nothing to do with speaking. And so it confused him, but because it's such an experimental thing, he couldn't be 100% sure that there wasn't some weird complication or something. And so, yeah. But now he has his suspicions because, of course, he's the medical expert and Jim isn't, right? Jim's just bullshitting without any idea of how accurate the bullshitting really is. And so, yeah, Cromwell decides to check in on Jim. But when he comes into his room, when he goes into the room, to check on him, he finds that Jim's bed is actually empty, and that Jim is downstairs in the basement laboratory or workshop, and is experimenting with his electronics as he always does because that's his thing, right? And so Cromwell is shocked by Jim's supposed recovery. However, Jim then from there he then reveals that the entire thing was a setup. He was lying about being sick. But he was lying about being sick. Not only was he lying about being sick, but here's the real twist for the audience, right? But he was also he was also lying about the radio broadcasts, right? Because he was actually also the one. He was the one creating the. He basically wrote fake broadcasts, fake updates about the Cromwell situation in New York, and read them. Right, like wrote like scripts saying, "Well, Mrs. Turner is accusing of Cromwell of murder, and that Cromwell has to get back to New York." He wrote those as a way to try to get Cromwell to leave so that he could have Klondike back to himself, right? And he did this by basically building the radio to also have a double function. It can also serve as a microphone, right? And so through a filter, he can flip this switch that disguises his voice and broadcasts what he's saying. Like he can record himself. He can broadcast that as a mic, not record himself, but as a microphone. He can read that, and people will hear it, assuming that it's from the radio, right, and not just him. And so he can broadcast from his basement and get away with doing it like that, which is what he had been doing, again, in an attempt to get Cromwell to go back to the U.S., mainland U.S., so that he and Klondike, Jim and Klondike, could get married as planned. But at this point, however, Jim is ruthless. He doesn't care anymore. He's completely lost any sort of sense of reason or whatever. He doesn't care anymore. So he decides to try and just straight up murder Cromwell in the lab right then and there by electrocuting him to death. With the electronics that he has, all the weird setup that he has, and his plan is to get away with it basically by continuing to pretend to be sick and act as though Cromwell died by touching the workshop's instruments out of curiosity, and that he was just stupid, basically, pretty much, right? And so as Jim is getting ready to shock him to death, however, Cromwell manages to turn on the switch to turn off the radio, or to turn the radio into a microphone. And from this, Klondike hears Jim reveal his plan, because Jim's doing the whole stereotype, the whole cliche of the evil man, the villain spending like 20 minutes or like 5 minutes talking about their mastermind plan. I got you, gloating, doing the whole gloaty thing, and not just pulling the switch, not just getting it over with. So while he's stalling, talking about his mastermind plan and all that, gloating and bragging and everything, Klondike hears this. She knows that it's Jim because she knows his voice, right? And she bangs on the lab door to try and stop him. And Mark overhears this, and he overhears everything but Jim's confession, right? So he doesn't know that Jim tried to kill Cromwell, right? But he comes and he breaks through the door and is overjoyed at Jim's supposed recovery. He breaks through the door and he sees Jim standing, and he sees that he's okay, and he's like, "My God, Jim, you're because he's his son, right? He's like, my boy's finally healed. He's finally cured. He's normal again. You did it, doctor." And he's really happy. He's got good feelings towards Cromwell now too, which he didn't have before necessarily. So everything's kind of worked out in a weird way. And so because of that, I guess Cromwell decides not to, because Mark thanks Cromwell and embraces Jim, goes in for a nice warm hug and everything. And so from that, Cromwell basically, because of that, he decides not to reveal the attempted murder to Mark. Ignorance is bliss, and Klondike knows. So Cromwell and Klondike, and of course Jim, they all know, but Mark doesn't. Mark's friend doesn't. The community doesn't. So Cromwell just decides to leave. He heads back to New York. He basically lets that whole situation play out, kind of like a live and let live, or live and let die sort of thing, really. But yeah. So then from there, the final scene takes place in Cromwell's office back in New York City. Even though it was technically illegal to operate on Jim without a license, a proper medical or surgical license, right? Cromwell is still somehow able to use the success of Jim's operation as a way to exonerate himself for the death of the client, right? And so that he's reinstated, he gets his office back, he gets his license back, he gets his reputation back. He's redeemed, right? And the female journalist from the beginning of the movie, from before, she comes back to congratulate him. She even comes back with the fake sling, as if her arm's broken again, just as, they're kind of like friends now or something, basically. Or she's an admirer of him, basically. Not, I don't know necessarily like a romantic or sexual one, but just in the sense that she looks up to him. She sees that he's a man of great integrity and innovation and everything with this operation that he's basically pioneered, and now it's been proven to be success. It's been proven to be a viable option to resolving this previously unsolvable, previously kind of terminal condition, right? This paralysis that kills people after 6 months to a year, and so on and so forth. But yeah, and so the two of them get back to talking, and Cromwell tells the journalist that he found gold. He basically tells her, "Yeah, I found gold while I was there in Alaska." And as they're talking, he receives a phone call about a woman who's there to visit him, and he tells the secretary to bring her in. And it's of course, this probably comes as no surprise to anybody, right? But it's of course revealed to be Klondike, right? Who's now married to him and now goes by Mrs. Klondike Cromwell, which kind of sounds cool, I guess. Lots of nice little bit of alliteration there and all that, right? And so, yeah, they all lived happily ever after from there. Jim and Mark get to be happy together at the trading post in Alaska, and Cromwell and Klondike get to be happy together in New York. And that's pretty much all there is to that. That's Klondike 1932. So yeah, let me just take another sip of water real quick. I usually have a co-host who covers these silences for me, but because I don't, and because I do a lot of talking in an hour or so, that's usually how long these videos are, I kind of have to sip. So yeah, excuse me for a moment as I do. I should probably write down the timestamps, the times where I sip, so that I can edit them out. But I don't know if you guys would want that. Let me know in the comments if you want me to edit out the drinking. But for me personally, when I watch videos and stuff and I see like very sharp edits like that, I tend to kind of tune out. Actually, it really irritates me. So for me personally, I make my videos the way that I would want to watch them. But if that's different for you guys, let me know. And if there's, I guess, if enough of a demand or something for it, then I will start taking them out. But just because for me personally, I don't like edits. Even if they're good edits, I just don't like them at all when I listen to stuff on YouTube or watch stuff on YouTube. So I prefer more organic material. And so that's what I do with my channel. And I make it the way I would want to watch it. That's my ethos. But if you guys have anything that deviates from that, just let me know. Don't want to go on too much longer about it. But yeah, just put a comment down in the comment section down below, and let me know if you would like me to take out the edits. And speaking of edits, I have to take another sip real quick, because we're going to be in for the long haul now. Now we're moving into the long haul, I guess now, because now we're moving into the discussion portion of the podcast episode, and yeah, we got a lot to get into. So I want to be as lubricated for it as possible, and not in that way. Lubrication. Naughty. Okay, so to start off, what would I rate this movie out of 10 and why? What would I rate the film out of 10 and why? I think for this one, I'm probably going to have to give it like a 5 out of 10, to be honest. A 5 out of 10. Because objectively speaking, I just gotta let's just be honest here. It's a terrible film in every way. Objectively speaking, for some weird reason, I came into this whole project that I'm doing where I'm just going on a marathon watching a bunch of old movies. Right now, we're doing pre-code Hollywood, so movies from like the the late 1920s, early 1930s, right? For whatever reason, I came into this project thinking, for some reason, I had this weird mentality, this weird mindset that old movies couldn't be bad. And maybe it's not that. Maybe it's more specifically that I for some reason, I thought that I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a bad older movie and a good older movie, if that makes sense, right? Like maybe because it's so old that for whatever reason, I can't pick up on the fact that it's whatever, not well written, not well directed, so on and so forth. I thought I wouldn't be able to tell the difference, basically, for some stupid reason. I don't, or maybe I just didn't think about it at all. But yeah, I'm sure that was naive on my part. But Klondike 1932, thankfully, has been here to correct that for me, and very early on into this marathon too. So it's good to get that preconceived notion or misconception out of the way now, so that I can be prepared for more in the future, I guess. Right. So there you go. It's nice and convenient that we got it out of the way while this series is still young, and so on and so forth. Right. But yeah, man, there's just so much wrong with this movie. That I to be honest, I think it would be best if I take my criticisms one step at a time, right? We talk about them in categories, right? So rather than all at once, because I feel like it would turn into a rant. But I guess if I had to summarize, or I guess distill, crystallize my thoughts about this movie overall, how I feel about it, I would say that it's bad, but it's not offensively bad. I didn't hate watching it. I guess it's bad in the sense that it's objectively bad. Unemotionally bad, right? Like, but not offensively bad. It's bad. It's bad in a way that no one would be able to dispute, right? So what I mean by when I say the movie is bad, I've said bad a lot now. But what I say the movie is not good that it is bad is that I don't know. I guess I could show it to anybody and they would be able to instantly, like they'd immediately just go, yes, this is not a good movie. Yes, this is bad. I'm not going to disagree. I don't think it's a point of contention. I think it's something that it's by our universal set of standards when it comes to media, and especially film in general. It's like, this just isn't good. It's not a good movie. I don't think anyone would argue that. I think that the thing to argue here would be whether or not it's a bad viewing experience, whether it's a bad cinematic experience, whether watching it is a waste of time or not. And we can get into that, but I guess the short answer for now is that not really. The pacing isn't awful. It doesn't, even though it's an hour long, it doesn't really feel like an hour. So they got that right, at least, right? It's not miserable to watch. I didn't want to like blow my brains out. I didn't want to pull a Cromwell and try to fly a broken down plane just because I watched it. Like, no, it was fine. It wasn't bad at all, really, in that sense. But it just wasn't good, and it was frustrating. I guess at its worst, it was sort of irritating that because for me, it's like I'm choosing these movies that I'm watching. I'm basing them really only on like the title, the thumbnail on YouTube, and the little blurb, the little synopsis in the description, right? And none of the summaries really. They're synopses. They're not. They're to get you into watching it. They don't give away any plot details necessarily. Really, they just tell you what the general premise is, right? And so this movie, it's disappointing. It's not. I don't hate it, but it's disappointing that it is such a big ball of wasted potential, because the premise was really interesting. I thought it was going to be a lot different. I thought it was going to be sort of like almost like a classical, like a story out of like a classic novel of some sort, like an 1800s novel almost, where you have some man who's disgraced, who's trying to put his past behind. He shows up to this completely alien, foreign environment. He tries to reinvent himself, and he meets new people, and he has new experiences, and there's probably an attractive woman or two somewhere along the way, right? And it's just like, I thought it was going to be that sort of conventional, like 1800s kind of romantic story, right? But like romantic adventure story / tragedy, probably, maybe, right? But it wasn't that at all. I thought there was going to be a lot. I thought the drama was going to be a lot more palpable. Maybe I thought it was going to be a bit more serious because of the fact that, again, Cromwell killed a man and he has to live with that for the rest of his life and all that. I thought it was going to really touch into those themes, because there's a lot. Because I mean, even though the movie itself isn't good, the problem is all in the execution. I don't think that I think the material itself is fine. There's a lot to work with here, but it's just not conveyed in the best possible way. I wouldn't say. I think they really flubbed the landing. Not only the landing, but the entire goddamn journey, I guess, if I had to put it a certain way. But yeah, that's how I would describe it. It's bad objectively. You can't look at it and go this is a well-made movie. This is a well put together film. You can't do that. It's not a good piece of cinema. But in terms of the experience of actually watching it, it's not offensive, but it's disappointing. It's disappointing. And if I was tasked with writing the screenplay for it, I would have done it a lot differently. But you can say that it's a hindsight kind of thing, right? It's easy to say that as a viewer, but I don't know. I feel like the problems that it has, they're very easy to fix, and I feel like any like halfway competent screenwriter should probably know how to avoid the problems that this movie falls into. But hey, that's just me. That's just my opinion on it. But we'll get a little more into it as the discussion goes, right? But yeah, all of that being said, while it isn't a good movie at all by any means, by any stretch of the imagination, I will say that it does there is a certain degree of charm to it, right? And maybe that's the pre-code Hollywood charm that I was talking about in the last episode, right? It's I guess how I would describe that charm would be, it feels free. It feels like the people who made it were at least able to make it as incompetent as they are. at least they were able to make the movie that they wanted to make, right? They were able to include some pretty heavy themes like suicide and stuff in there, but do it in a way that they wanted to do it. They didn't have to kowtow to any sort of conventions or anything like that. They did because they weren't good, right? But they didn't have to. So you still feel that sort of that sense of rawness and freeness and almost like authenticity, even in a bad pre-code movie, Hollywood movie like this. That pre-code charm is still there. It makes you feel as though anything is possible. And yeah, as I was watching it, I had no idea what to expect. And even though it was a bit cliched when all was said and done, even though things just sort of played out, even though the basic plot points were all stereotypical, what you would expect from a movie like this, the way that they got there, the journey itself was it was bumpy. It was bumpy in a bad way this time around. But the journey for Uptown New York was pretty bumpy too. I just liked it more and I thought it was better, but they're still bumpy. And the bumpiness is not necessarily a positive or negative. It just depends on how you execute it again. And so it's nice it's probably a good thing that we started off this marathon with a good example of a pre-code Hollywood movie, right? And now we are following that up with the other side of the coin, right? The other side of the token, which is of course a bad example of a pre-code Hollywood film, right? Or movie. Terms are of course interchangeable, but yeah, it's not even that bad. But it's just I wish that there was more to it, and we'll get into that. So yeah, I think the main thing to take away from this movie, I think the main thing that I took away from it, I think the main thing that like anyone could take away from it in general, is that watching it helped me realize why some of the more cliched kinds of stories are important, or at least why they're written the way they are, if that makes sense, right? Because I think the reason why writing cliches, the reason why cliches in media, I think the reason why cliches are cliches, why they're so common, and like why so many people use them, is because they're easy, right? Well, no, I messed that up. Sorry. I think the reason why cliches are so common is because they work, right? They're easy. Cliches, they're easy and they work. And so even if you get a lazy screenwriter, right, you can sort of almost get away with phoning it in when you make a movie. That's like when you make a cliched movie, right? Because you can get away with it just as long as you use the right cliches in the right way, right? It's like comfort food, you know. It's like I don't know. It's really hard it's even hard for like schools and prisons, let's just say, to pick an extreme example, or like really cheap restaurants to. It can be hard for them to mess up something as simple as let's say a hamburger, right? Or fries, because those are just so easy to make and so many people like them and they're so they're just so likable in and of themselves because they're simple and they're effective and they give you what you kind of want, what you expect. They're comfort food, you know? So it's hard, like even a bad burger is just like, where as opposed to like something more complicated, like if you try to make like a meatloaf or something, I don't know, some convoluted, like really expertise kind of artisan kind of thing. It's like that's if you met that the risks are much. It's kind of like risk and reward. It's like up all the way up here as opposed to just down here with the burger. It's just a kind of a flat line. You can have fantastic burgers. You can have terrible burgers, but it's like generally speaking, it's kind of hard to mess up a hot dog. It's pretty hard to mess up a hamburger. You know, let's just put like undercooking it or whatever behind aside, right? Just object like you know what I mean. Standardly speaking, I guess God, I can't really talk, but I hope you guys know what I'm trying to say. I need to work on balancing reading from my script that I have on my phone here, balancing doing this and balancing kind of going off of it and freestyling. I'm not really that good at it yet, but that's the point of this series. So yeah, hopefully we get better soon enough. But I hate being stuck in this like weird era of like not being able to of knowing how to do it and not being able to do it. You know what I mean? Like knowing how to make something, but not being able to actually implement those steps or whatever. Let me take a sip of water and hopefully I can gather my thoughts because I have a point that I'm trying to make here. I just got to make sure I make it in the right way. So uno momento, por favor. That's right. When in doubt, turn to Spanish, apparently. When in doubt, speak Espanol. But yeah, so, yeah, like I said, it's, like, I think I guess the best example for film. Let's use film because we're talking about movies, right? Let's use other movies as an example, right? So for like Godzilla, for instance, right? Like the Godzilla series, there are a lot of movies. It's a long running series, years and years and years of just Godzilla. It's it's a lot harder to mess up a Godzilla movie or a Godzilla type movie, like big monsters beating the shit out of each other. It's really hard to mess that up. Um, it's hard. Well, let's say this. It's relatively harder to mess that up because they have messed it up plenty of times, and people could argue that the whole thing's messed up. But that's a matter of taste, right? That's subjective. But it's a lot harder to mess up a monster movie than it is to mess up, let's say, um, like Schindler's List or something like that, or like a Holocaust drama. When you make a bad movie, when you make like a bad Holocaust or like World War II movie, it can be like really offensive. It can piss off a lot of people. It can leave a bad taste in the mouth. It can probably ruin your reputation as a person in the industry or whatever if you did that. Whereas if you're just making if you're making Godzilla versus Kong and it's just giant monsters beating the shit out of each other, that's the people who are going to like it are going to like it probably no matter what anyway, right? And the people who don't are just going to look at it and go, yeah, it's just not really my thing. In terms of the scale or the gradient or whatever, however you want to describe it, it's like the scale for like monster movies going from like good to average to bad. The scale, it's not as long, I guess. It's not as long as something like, let's say, like drama. So the drama genre, the line. Let me try to figure this out real quick. The drama line for like, I guess more, I don't want to say serious movies, but like, yeah, for more I guess complicated films, the scale is to here, right? And you got to be careful, because if you do a really good one, you could be, let's say this is the best, this is the worst. The best get a lot of recognition, like it all gets recognition, it gets a lot more recognition than, let's say, with Godzilla, it's like with monster movies or something like that. It's like this. And then with like, let's say, like the most extreme example of like a bad genre or whatever, like direct to DVD kids movies and shows and like shit like that. It's like that, So I don't know. I hope that makes sense. I'm not really sure where I'm going with it, but I hope that I kind of conveyed what I'm trying to say. I think it's obvious what I'm trying to say anyway, right? But I kind of wanted to hammer it in a little more. But yeah, so that being said, right, like even if you're a lazy screenwriter, you can still pass off like a good, like it's not a good movie, but it's like, okay, it's fine. It is what it is. You're neutral about it. At least you met that minimum, let's say, like the flat line. At least you're not like down here. You're right here. It is what it is. It's not, it's just a big nothing burger, but at least it isn't dog shit, I guess, basically that's the mentality that a lot of these people probably have, right? Like, let me just plug this cliche into here. It's a formula. That's why it sucks. That's why it's hard to talk about. Excuse me. That's why it's hard to talk about, because it's not inspired at all. It's not Star Wars. It's not Lord of the Rings. It's not something that comes from a place of genuine creative interest and passion. It's like math for media, And so that's why it's like math for media. It's like math for art, right? And the two can kind of come together sometimes, right? But not like that. Not this way. This is cheap. That's why cliches are cheap. That's why cliches are looked down upon or whatever, right? Because they're really easy. They're really easy, and if you do too many of them, then it becomes a formula. It becomes formulaic, But I don't know. To me, but also the way I see it, it's like that. That's why a movie like Uptown New York, for example. Let's take Uptown New York, for instance. Uptown New York, it can be leagues better than Klondike without even having to try, really, right? Because Uptown New York, it gives its audiences what they would. It gives its audience, let's say, what they would generally expect from a movie of its kind, right? And then, well, beyond that, it's even sort of, I guess, generous enough, let's say, to throw in a few twists and turns to the standard formula, right? There are like I said earlier, it's like the road is bumpy, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It can be a good thing, in fact. People like adventure. People like straying off the beaten path every now and then. Even the most conservative, or like not conservative with small c, by the way, not political. We're not talking about politics here, but conservative with a small c, little c conservatives, and just people who don't like what they like they can get behind that. every once in a while, like even them on occasion. So, but yeah, Klondike, man, Klondike, it almost has that same sort of, it almost has like the same kind of twists that Uptown New York had. And if you don't know what the twists are, feel free to check out my review on Uptown New York, right? But Uptown New York, basically, it had like these really interesting twists that made it more than just, that made the movie overall, it made it more than just a typical romantic like comedy drama and like a typical sort of love triangle story. You didn't know what to expect when you were watching it as a viewer. And it had a lot of charm to it because of that, right? So it enhanced the pre-code charm that was already there by having good writing, by having a solid story, even if it was somewhat cliched, even if it was somewhat conventional. Because I wouldn't say that it was necessarily cliched. I would say that the difference is that something like Uptown New York, because it has those twists and turns, even if it's kind of cliched, I would say that a movie like that, it has a conventional story. It has a typical story, but not a cliched story. Whereas something like Klondike, because it's bad and because it doesn't really do anything with the pieces that it has, I would say that it's cliched because to me, the connotation that cliched has, it's negative. It means, it's lazy, it's lazy, it's uninspired, it's bored, it doesn't actually care about the product that it's making. So why should the people watching the movie even care if the people who made it didn't care? That's kind of how I see it. So yeah, that's the distinction that I draw. I don't know if it's different for other people. Let me know in the comments if it's different for you guys. But yeah, Klondike almost has some of the same sorts of twists same kinds of twists that Uptown New York had that made it good, right? That redeemed it, kept it from being cliched, right? But I would say the version of that, the closest Klondike gets to being like Uptown New York in that respect is when Jim tries to just straight up murder Cromwell in the lab, right? But the impact on that it just isn't all that palpable. It's not the same, right? It's just not the same because and the problem is that everything that came before that one scene was either nonsense or near nonsense, So what's another silly plot development, right? What's another weird twist? It's like, okay, this is just it ruined, like the rest of it set the stage for that one moment, and because those other things were nonsense, even if that one twist was kind of okay, like, oh, it turns out that he was the one making the radio broadcast, like that's kind of neat. But it's like even that's like it's marred, it's ruined by the fact that the movie overall, it's like just not that good. So it's like, okay, that left a bad taste in my mouth. It soured my opinion on it. I can't really get behind it, even when it's being like okay, right? Even when it's competent. So yeah, Klondike, it certainly isn't the worst thing in the world. But I want to actually spend my time when I make these videos, believe it or not, talking about good movies, not bad ones. So for that, I can't give it anything higher than a 5. A 5 is an F. It's an F. It failed. It's a failure. It's halfway, but it's a failure. And even 5 is a generous. I was probably going to give it like a 4.5 or a 4.75, but I'll round that up to 5 because at least if it wasn't a waste of time to watch. It wasn't a total waste of time because it did allow me to, I guess, it did help me appreciate the value of storytelling tropes a little more than I would have had I not watched it, perhaps, right? So now going into the technical side of things, the movie Klondike is a technical disaster, right? And so when I say Klondike, when I'm talking about a movie's technical aspects, I'm referring to the production, the music, the acting, or the production, the music, the editing, the camera work, and so on and so forth, right? This movie is a technical disaster, right? It's bad. The sound editing during any scene without dialogue is just atrocious. For instance, when Cromwell is getting out of the crashed plane when he first arrives in Alaska, everything is just completely silent, right? In a film with good sound editing, there would probably be, to fill the silence, there would probably be Foley of boots crunching in the snow, wind blowing in the background, tree branches creaking. But no, you don't get any of that. You get none of that here. Even when the man riding in the dog sled comes to rescue him, it's just silent. Like there's no sound. You don't even hear the man on the sled show up. You just see it. The dogs don't bark. The sled doesn't screech against the snow. Nothing. And there are also a lot of, and so the sound is bad, but then there are also a lot of, just in terms of like the regular editing, there are a lot of really jarring jump cuts. Some of which even, like most of which actually, the majority of which take place in the middle of the same shot, right? So like the movie jumps, and I don't think that. And so this is the problem with these old movies, right? I'm not entirely sure if this is because of the editing or because of the film itself. I'm not sure if it might be. So I might have to give them a pass on this one because I'm not 100% either way as to whether or not this is just the film itself being old, and so they had to like cut the bad parts away to preserve at least like 95% of it or whatever. I'm not sure if that's the case, but it doesn't seem like that to me. I don't know, maybe to me it seems more like they're just editing it weird. It doesn't seem like it's a mistake. It doesn't seem like it's a product of the age of the movie itself. I don't know, but you could correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, it's just a lot of these like jumpy jumps. That might actually be the case, though. The more I think about it, that might actually be the case. But still, it's like I don't know. The worst example of this is at the end, right? When Cromwell kisses Klondike after a whole movie of, let's say, like romantic tension between them. You know, it's the moment that the audience has been waiting for the entire time, right? That, or at least the moment that they should be waiting for the entire time, and they ruin it by cutting cutting the scene right as he leans in for the kiss, right? He leans in and it's like wham, it cuts to them already midway through said kiss, and so you don't actually get to see it, I guess, land or whatever. You don't get to see like the moment, right? And so there, for me it's the easiest kind of scene you can do. You literally just have the two actors kiss real quick, and yet they still find a way to mess it up with bad editing. It could be that, or it could be an unfortunate circumstance of like, well, this just so happened to be the part of the film that did not survive, and so we had to cut it out. Now that I think about that, yeah. Now that I've heard myself say it, I guess maybe that could be a possibility too. Wouldn't that seems like a likelier possibility? Maybe is that the film has just not been preserved 100%. That not like maybe like 95% of it made it, and there's like a remaining 5%. Sorry, that didn't make the cut or whatever. But yeah, if that's the case, then I guess ignore that part of this criticism because then it's not necessarily valid, is it? But yeah, I don't know. The movie's not good anyway. Regardless, it doesn't like make or break the movie whether or not those weird edits are in there or skips or whatever you want to call them. But yeah, I would say it also doesn't help that there isn't very much music throughout the entire the movie's entire runtime. You know, and I think this was the same case with Uptown New York, but it might just be like a sign of the times or whatever. They might not have just had. It might just not have been a thing to have a standard to have music like a soundtrack for every or a score for every film, right, or whatever. Just might not have been an industry practice at the time. But yeah, not a lot of music. Most scenes are either silent, near silent, or just a bunch of people talking, right? Just a bunch of dialogue, and so it's really nothing too special. And like with Uptown New York, again, to compare it to another movie, this movie, Klondike, is also much closer to being a play in terms of the production itself than it is a fully fledged feature film. Not only by modern standards, but by the standards of the time, I guess, as well. You know, it's not like a movie. It's hard to look at it as this being the same as like a mid to late 1930s movie or like a 40s movie or a 50s movies. You know, even things that are relatively contemporary. It's like it's more like a play than it is like those kinds of films, right? So yeah. And although I liked the play aspect in Uptown New York, I can't say I like it here because there just isn't enough to work with in Klondike to warrant a 60-minute runtime to make it a film length production, right? And I wouldn't. Well, no, actually, well, no, it's not that there's there's not enough to work with because there, like I said before, there is good material here. It's just executed horrifically. It's bad. So yeah, and I think to me that's the greatest artistic or creative sin of all. You know, in any movie or book or TV show or play or opera, so on and so forth. Any creative medium like that, the greatest sin that you can commit as a creative or as an artist is wasting potential. And that's easy for me to say as a consumer, right? As a viewer, as a guy on the other side of things, right? But it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's like that's the biggest thing you could. It's really disappointing. It's disappointing. Disappointment is a lot of the time it's worse than outrage because at least outrage is visceral, right? At least outrage is a strong emotion. But with disappointment, it's like you kind of you don't know what to do. It's so tepid. It's like, how do I even respond to this? This is nothing. I have nothing. I don't even have anything to work with in terms of criticism or commentary or you know, like processing just what I've seen, like, and having a proper response or reaction. And that's just, that's as a general viewer, not only as like a podcaster or whatever, but yeah, it's just weird, isn't it? So, yeah, in terms of, so now in terms of, what I thought about the characters. So the characters themselves, yeah, for whatever reason, in this movie, the secondary characters are actually given more depth and backstory than the leads. By the end of the film, we know more about Evans, the pilot friend, and how he accidentally killed that man during the flying show than we do about Cromwell or Klondike, right? All we know about Klondike, or all we know about Cromwell, is that he pretty much he fucked up that operation before the movie started, and that now it's that mistake has pretty much overshadowed everything else about him, right? And then and then on the other hand, all we know about Klondike is that she's a pretty blonde, and that she knows how to run a trading post out in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, and then that she's supposed to marry Jim because they grew up together, and that's how they tend to do things where they're from, right? It's like real fascinating stuff, guys. Like, well, there's nothing even really here. No, it's like, no, the characters are little more than tools to further the plot in this film, right? You wouldn't think for a moment that any of them would have any sort of life outside of the movie itself, if that makes sense. They're just automatons, and there's hardly even anything to say about them beyond that. Like, you couldn't see yourself eating lunch with one of them, talking about anything that, talking about things that don't have to do with the movie, right? Like, you couldn't see yourself having an extended conversation with one of them about stock prices, or what it's like to go to the beach, or something random like that, just to give some examples. They aren't fully developed, and it's painfully obvious all throughout the movie. And because they literally and this is also a fault of the actors as well. The acting is not good. The acting is really not good. The way I grade acting, the way I review it, I tend, like, when I analyze something or assess something, I guess, media, I usually don't really think about acting, to be honest. I don't know why. Because for me, it's like the best kind of acting is acting that just makes you not question it at all. So if I don't even have to think about the acting, then it's good acting to me, basically. Pretty much. It's like, as long as I don't get pulled out of the story because of how bad an actor is delivering their lines, then I don't care, right? But in this case, it's like, when my attention is drawn to the acting, it's usually a bad thing. It's probably a bad thing, right? Because now I'm not thinking about the characters or the story. I'm thinking about what went into making the characters and the story, and I don't like that. I don't like being pulled out. I hate being pulled out of things as a viewer. I like to immerse myself in a films or a TV shows, or a piece of media's like fictional universe, inner world. And so yeah, the acting is it's not good. It's B list, C list acting, and all the actors are B list or C list actors, so it makes sense. But yeah, it's that lower caliber, that lower class of acting ability. It's not good. So yeah, the characters. Because of that, the characters, they just, they saunter from scene to scene, go through the motions of, their interactions, their relationships, but not really, and nothing really there. And that's it. That's really all there is to it. And that just keeps going on and on like that, rinse, recycle, and repeat until the film runs out. The light, like the film that the film is being played off of, literally. Until the literal film runs out, the lights turn on in the theater, and everybody walks out exactly as they were when they walked in. If not a little worse, for having wasted money on an hour-long nothing burger like Klondike 1932. Not to be overly harsh about it, but yeah. And so then, in terms of the story itself, hold on a sec. I gotta just. It's just taking longer than I thought it would. I'm kind of spending too much time stalling, aren't I? I kind of need to just get through this. I'm figuring it out. I don't mind if these first few episodes are bad because because the whole point is that I picked obscure old movies so that I wouldn't have to be scrutinized as much. It's very freeing when you know that most, probably not a lot of people are going to watch you, right? So it's good. I need as much room to practice as possible. So it's fine if we go off the cuff, and it's fine if I constantly reference the fact that I'm doing a shitty job or whatever. Not necessarily a shitty job, just not the best possible job that I could do. I want, when I make these, I want to set out to make the best possible version of whatever it is that I'm making, whether it's a review or a talk podcast. Because that's another thing we're going to do, by the way. While I take this little break real quick, we have plans to start a a talking podcast, because I realized that this podcast is a review. I'm going to say the word podcast a lot, right? But it's like I said bad earlier, but it's the review. It's a reviewing show, right? It's a review show, but I also want to have a talk show. So we're thinking about starting a show called the Imperial Roundtable. And even though it's called the Imperial Roundtable, that's just the best name that we could come up with, right? It sounds nice, it's snappy, it's effective in terms of branding and all that. But the problem with it is that even though it's called Imperial Roundtable, we won't necessarily have like more than 2 people on at a time. Sometimes I think the average will probably be like me and just one other person, probably me and Simone, right? But I don't really want to change it because I think it's a snappy title. I think it works very well. So I think it would be a shame if I changed it, right, to something that doesn't need to, something unnecessary. Because it already works. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But yeah, just keep that in mind, I guess, when you watch it. But yeah, that's our next big project, I guess. We got some other stuff going on too, but you'll see it when it develops, and we'll obviously we'll let you all know. We'll keep you all up to date. And that will be a podcast about. It'll just be conversation. It'll just be us hanging out, talking about whatever set topics are on the agenda and all that. It'll be recorded like these. Don't worry, it won't be audio only. But yeah, that'll be happening very soon. Really looking forward to it. But in the meantime, I'll continue to do these and hopefully get better at them with each episode I do of Coffee with Holden. It's just a matter of getting the nerves out. It's a matter of getting used to being alone again. Because I was alone for most of my YouTube career, I guess, before Imperial Tides. But now it's a matter of readjusting, recalibrating. But only time will tell, and only time and being consistent with it, making this a habit. But yeah, it takes me like 3 hours on average to make an episode like this because it's an hour of watching the actual movie, about an hour of writing the script, and then an hour of talking about it. And that's just a minimum. It's probably like 3 to 5 hours per video. To be honest, depending on how long the movie is, depending on how long the media is, the show or the movie or whatever, and then how long it takes me to write the answers down. But yeah. Anyway, so we left off talking about the characters. Now to get into, I guess, the big thing, the biggest criticism I have about the movie, or biggest set of criticisms I have about the movie, and that would be in the story. So with regard to the story, right? So what did I think of the story itself? Well, for me, and I think for most viewers, the story would be hard to buy into. It's very hard to buy into, right? I mean, just picture this for a second, right? You have a doctor who performs an experimental operation on a high-profile client, right? The operation fails, the client dies, and for some reason, it's somehow the doctor's fault. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And that's the foundation of the film's narrative. And so even when your movie's narrative foundation is dubious at best, there has to be, I don't know, there has to be something else that counterbalances it, and nothing else does, right? So like if you're gonna have like a shaky narrative foundation, you should at least have, like, I don't know, funny moments, quirky scenes between characters, kind of cutesy stuff that might make up for it in some way or another. But it doesn't even have that, so it's just disappointing all around, right? But and incompetent all around, right? But yeah. And so but for me, why I have a hard time believing that Cromwell would have been condemned for what he did, because there has to be more that goes into these kinds of cases of like assumed, I guess, let's say disputed like medical malpractice, right, or something like that, right? Like there has to be more that goes into them than just well, this doctor did this experimental operation that we're not even entirely 100% sure will go well or not, and the client was famous, so it's like, now he's dead. Well, he's fucked now. Like even with a famous client, I have a hard time believing it. That the guy would just be completely screwed after that. Especially considering the fact that, like, let's just think about this for a minute, right? Like Cromwell, he had to get to a point where he would be able to perform to be able to have high profile clients, right? So he himself is a high profile surgeon, isn't he? He must be like very well regarded in his field in order to get to the point where he has people of that stature coming to him and trusting their lives with him, trusting him medically, to get to the point where he can actually operate on them, right? Like that there has to be something to be said. There has to be something there, right? There has to be something to be said about that, right? But I don't know. I have a hard time believing that a successful, reputable surgeon like Cromwell, uh, well regarded, well esteemed in his field, would could lose it all over one failure, even a highly publicized one. But maybe that's just me giving too much credit to the system. I understand that sometimes optics are everything, and that the court of public opinion is rules prevails over the court of the actual court. I guess. Yeah, you know what I mean. So um, the legal and federal and actual courts, right? But yeah, no, the so yeah, that's a problem. But I would say the real problems I have with the movie are probably in the contradictions and the coincidences that the script tends to cling to in order to keep the plot moving along, right? So it's not even like, even though I have a problem with that like initial premise, that's not even the most ridiculous bit. That's just the tip of the iceberg, right? So the real meat and potatoes of what's wrong with this movie, honestly, it's in this next part of the premise, right? Which is just the fact that Cromwell just so happens to arrive at the one trading post in all of Alaska, which is like especially in the 1930s, probably one of the least populated states in the entire country, right? And probably one of the least populated places in the entire North American continent, right? That he just so happens to arrive at this one trading post in all of that area that has a genius inventor living in it, who has a radio, this crazy radio that's so powerful that it picks up broadcast signals from New York all the way in Alaska about Cromwell himself, about Cromwell, and it just so happens that the broadcasts it's covering at that moment are about Cromwell and his failed operation. It's just ridiculous to me. It's like, really, come on, small world. Then it must be a really small world that this movie's set in, because that is ridiculous, and that the ridiculousness of that premise, it kills it for me. It completely kills any sort of dramatic tension that the film could have built up over the course of its runtime. Because I don't want to say, I was going to say something else, but that would be a bit too gross for whatever. But I guess it's like it just pukes it up, right? It's like it's just puking it all up at once within the first 20 or so minutes. It's it's bad. But yeah, a little. Let me just say this: a little foreplay would go a long way. Let's just say. But yeah, and so I guess the other major thing that the movie messes up is how, when Cromwell first shows up to the trading post, right, and everyone thinks that he's Evans, the dead pilot friend, and that Evans is Cromwell, and that Cromwell, the evil surgeon or whatever, is dead in the plane. They try to establish that as like, oh, this is going to be something that's going to affect all of the characters for the rest of the film, right? And the movie even doubles down on this fact by having Jim, while he's still paralyzed and everything, express his disdain for the supposedly dead Cromwell by saying things like "good riddance" and "Cromwell killed his client and now he's dead as retribution and he deserved it," and so on and so forth. But then, literally like 5 minutes later, literally like the next scene, as soon as they cut into the next scene, everyone's calling Cromwell. And the plot continues uninterrupted, and it's never brought up again, never addressed. It's one of those discrepancies. It's one of those plot holes, and it's like, what the hell? Why'd you even bring it up if it wasn't going to be a thing that was a thing for the rest of the movie, right? They don't still think he's Evans at all. Mark even Mark even trusts Jim's dad. Mark even trusts Cromwell to operate on Jim, knowing everything about him, knowing the whole story and the controversy and everything. And Jim never even has the chance to protest or like bring his perspective and follow up on the comments that he made earlier about how, oh, it's good that Cromwell's dead, right? He never even gets the chance to like follow up on that, because he's unconscious and off screen by the time they perform the operation. So it's just nonsense. It's like, what was the point? You made the movie so much worse by making it nonsensical. Like, there's no consistency now. Good job. Congratulations, you guys. You messed up your own canon, right? Also, I mean, and then there's just also the matter of like Cromwell and Klondike falling in love like way too quickly. They play checkers and talk for one scene, and boom, it's like they're Romeo and Juliet all of a sudden. And that's just ridiculous to me. I didn't believe it for a second. I didn't buy it for a second, that because they really did. They really tried to establish within like within the framework of like within like the span of like 2 or 3 scenes, that 2 or 3 really short scenes too at that Cromwell and Klondike were suddenly like this item or whatever, and that Mark could use that as leverage against good old Cromwell to force him, basically blackmail him and gaslight him into I hate that word gaslight, but it's actually a 30s term, so it's a vintage term. It's only just been popularized today, but yeah, to basically gaslight him into helping, doing the operation on Jim. So it's like, okay, cool. So yeah, I guess if I had been tasked with writing the screenplay for this film, I think if I could just provide some random, and this is kind of the crux of this episode, right? Kind of doing my own amateur like revisions and stuff, and trying to do this is my own take on the movie. How I would have done it instead. So instead of the mess that they ended up going with, I think I would pretend as the writer. I guess I would pretend to forget about the failed operation altogether, right? Cromwell's past in New York, and I would focus on having Cromwell progressively adjust to his new life at the trading post, right? His new life in Alaska. I would have the people there mistake him for Evans and have that mistake stick. Have Cromwell go along with that to avoid being condemned. And I would have it just be a thing where it's like Cromwell's just kind of an idiot. You know, Cromwell just makes the mistake. It's his own fault that he is so paranoid about it. I wouldn't have the fucking magic radio that manages to pick up signals from New York all the way in Alaska and all that bullshit, right? I wouldn't have any of that be a factor at all. Instead, I would choose to focus on having Cromwell just basically make a moral mistake in his own, make a moral, I guess, existential mistake internally, right? And then have that play out with real world consequences, external consequences later. It's not the best thing, but it's a lot better than I think what they decided to go with, at least to me, right? So yeah, I think the people should probably, like the people in the trading post community and everything, they should mistake Cromwell for Evans, and Cromwell should be he should give in to his fear and accept that, and that'll be his mistake, right? It's not really a mistake, kind of, but it is, because it will be later on, right? And so he'll pretend to be Evans, and over time he'll get closer to Klondike. He'll probably work at the trading post. He'll be like an extra hand or whatever. He'll do all like the manual labor that Mark can't, because Mark's the owner and Mark's older. So as an older man, he might not be able to do a lot of like the heavy lifting and maybe doing the rounds of the village or something, delivering things to people and stuff. So maybe Cromwell as Evans will pick that up for him and take over and basically find a place for himself in the trading post. Like he can live there. They'll cover his room and board. Just as long as he works for them and everything, and he might even make a little bit of money. And maybe Mark will even consider giving him the post, because Jim will be dead by the time he would need to inherit it anyway or whatever, right? So like maybe Cromwell as Evans is basically kind of wheedled his way into a new life for himself, a new identity, a fresh start, but it's a bit manipulative. It's built on lies, right? So and that's the dark side of it. That's the problem. That's the conflict. That's like a stereotypical conventional kind of story, right? But like that would be so much better than what they went with, because like it looks like that's I don't know. Anyway, it'd be like that. That's what that's what these kinds of movies are about, right? That's how they usually tend to go, and people watch them because, again, there's a reason why the cliches are cliches. There's a reason why the standard stories are standard. It's because they work, and there are ways to put variations on them that are interesting. You know, you don't have to overcomplicate it sometimes. Sometimes a burger and fries are good enough. Just put some weird sauce on it that makes it taste different from all of the other burger and fry, combinations that a person could eat. You know what I mean? Like, that's how you make your restaurant stand out. That's how you make your recipe distinct. That's how you make it unique. But no, it's like, I don't know. They went for like a total fuck fest in this one. They did not care at all. They just did whatever it took to get from plot point A to plot point B to plot point C to plot point D. That's all they did. That's why it's so bad, because it's lazy and it's nonsense. So, yeah. And so, yeah, Cromwell would live as Evans in this place. Months would go by, and over the course of those months, that's the time frame in which Cromwell would get to know Klondike, and their relationship would blossom. It would take place over a long period of time, because it would need to, right? It can't just be some magical overnight thing, because Klondike has been raised all her life to expect to marry Jim, and she's a small town girl in Alaska, it's like she would have to. It would take a very long time for someone from her background to be convinced of the fact, like be convinced of like a possible future, to be convinced that there is an alternative, there is another way to live than the way that she has been brought up to expect all her life, right? It's like that makes more sense. Months, you would need months for something like that to take place, right? For those changes to kind of happen, right, and for them to be embodied and all that, and you know, and it would also create more tension as well because the clock would continue to tick, and it just the more time goes by, the closer to dying Jim would get, right, and so the more drastic the situation would be, the more important it would be for Cromwell to try and operate on him to save him, and so. And there are so many different ways that you can take this, right? There are so many different ways that you can approach a situation like this. Maybe, for example, you could have, as he, so like for example, you could as Cromwell and also the way I wrote. So I actually just came up with something pretty interesting. I think what I just came up with is actually better than what I wrote down. So I'll say what I came up with now first, and then say what I wrote down, right, to follow it. But I think one approach you could have to this whole conflict to this whole situation is, maybe Cromwell decides to. Let me take a sip of water real quick as I figure out the best way to put this. Okay. Okay. So maybe you could have Cromwell try to. You could have Cromwell basically try to be selfish and try to be like, fuck Jim. I don't know who this person is anyway. Klondike's hot. I want to be with Klondike. I want to marry her. I don't want anything in my way. Maybe Mark is going to give me the store. I'm all set. Everything would be so much simpler if Jim just died, right? Maybe that could be the conflict, is that it would make more sense for him to let Jim die, but then there's the moral side of it. Like maybe just in the back of his mind, he's got this voice that's just nagging him to do it. And so there's being a person, being a doctor and everything, and just being who he is, being a decent human being, right? Maybe there would be a part of Cromwell that just couldn't stand by and let a man die when he can actually do something about it as an experienced medical professional, And so maybe something weird will happen where he tries to perform the operation on Jim secretly, like in secret. Like maybe he'll like knock him out with anesthesia and like sneak him into like a guest room in the trading post or something and try to do the operation. But then someone sees him. Maybe it's Mark. Maybe Mark sees him and then uses that as leverage against Mark or against Cromwell for marrying Klondike. Like maybe he'll be like, you're a liar. You're not someone I can trust after all. Because Mark, maybe he'll be established as like the skeptic from the very beginning. Like he didn't trust Cromwell at first, but then Cromwell, pretending to be Evans, proved his worth by helping out and being productive and making the trading post better than ever before, maybe more profitable than it has been in years or something, or in its entire history maybe. So Mark will feel betrayed by this, and he'll be like, I knew this entire time that there was something fishy about you, boyo. And maybe he'll try to blackmail. He'll hold that against Cromwell, who's been pretending to be Evans, obviously. So he'll be like, you were Cromwell this entire time. And so he'll be like, even if you save Jim, like, you got to get out of here, or I'm going to tell, you got to get out of here. You have no future here. It's all going to go to Jim. It's going to go to Jim, and it's like, yeah, and he's going to marry Klondike, and you don't belong here anymore. Get the hell out. You'll just be lucky if I don't report you to the authorities or whatever, right? And so that'll be the threat. That'll be the conflict. Is that if Cromwell doesn't leave after the operation, after Jim recovers, then Mark will rat him out, basically snitch him out, and get him arrested or something for having a false identity, or accusing him of hiding from his reputation, or just something, just making his life hell for him, basically. And so, yeah, and it's hard to start again, right? Because Cromwell has already been forced to start once, so starting twice, that might be too much for him. He might not be able to do that. And so this is kind of it. This is it for him. This is the big moment. That's a more. I feel like that's a conflict that would suit this kind of story a bit more, right, than what they decided to go with. But yeah. And so then the other option I had though was maybe having oh, and it would make sense why Mark would suspect him too, because he's a man that shows up out of nowhere and starts to put the moves on the woman that Jim was expected to marry, and he kind of just comes in and disrupts their lives. He is like that charismatic stranger kind of trope, right? Trope character, right? So it would make sense that Mark would be suspicious, and Mark's not objective about, he's not unbiased about this anyway. He doesn't have to be unbiased because it's all his life really, and it's not really Cromwell's. Cromwell just is like a guest in his life. He's an unexpected visitor. He's kind of interrupted the flow of the way things are supposed to be there. So yeah, it would make sense why he would be against him, 100%. But yeah, so then maybe by the third act, another way you could do it. So maybe another way you could do it would be to have. Well, no, let me just forget that one. I don't think that one's even. It's not worth complicating it. I think the way the new revised version of what I wrote down here is actually better. But I guess what I wrote was that basically Mark or Jim would find something out that would give Cromwell away as Cromwell. Maybe they'd find a picture of him in his like surgeon days or something, and then I don't know, use that against him, force Cromwell to operate on Jim, and then I don't know. But that doesn't make that much sense, to be honest. So yeah, I like the other one. I came up with a bit better. So yeah, and then maybe a solution would be to maybe an ending, right? Maybe an ending. Maybe it could all end with Cromwell doing the operation, curing Jim, and then just leaving. Leaving, just being like, "There's nothing left for me here." Leaving the trading post behind, and then maybe Jim and Klondike, or maybe not Jim and Klondike, right? Maybe. Jim and Klondike end up getting married, even though she's fallen in love with Cromwell over all the time they spent together, over all the months, right? And so maybe from there the movie can end with like a bit of an epilogue, right? Maybe the final scene would take place would have Cromwell and Klondike running into each other once again years later, and the movie from there could have one of let's say like two endings, right? Two main endings. The first ending could have Cromwell and Klondike lament the fact that they never went anywhere together, and the movie could go out on a more tragic, somber note, right? And then maybe the second ending could have Klondike reveal that she and Jim either got divorced or that the operation actually failed and Jim died not long after Cromwell left, or something similar like that, right? And the movie could go out on an optimistic, but like let's say tentative note, right? Like they'll probably end up still getting together anyway in the end. But it's still left ambiguous because it's been such a long time, and they're both much more worn out and jaded than they were when they first met. Or maybe in the time that they've been apart, Cromwell has gotten remarried and has like a new life, but he doesn't like it still, like he's still unsatisfied. And so maybe that could be the tragedy, right? That he got remarried, he has kids now maybe even, and he's like a small town doctor or something. Maybe works at like a post office or anything really, but he's basically moved on. But Klondike's back somehow, and maybe she's tracked him down because she's just been miserable ever since Jim died. It could be something really tragic, really tragic like that, and they can't get back together because it's just too late. Like things have moved on, and so it could be really heavy. It depends on how you want to do. It depends on what you want to do with it, right? It depends on what kind of impact you want to leave on the viewers. But there are so many different options. There's so many different ways to go about doing it. So many different ways to approach it. Yeah. So, I guess the general way would probably be to leave it ambiguous, right? Leave it up to the audience to decide, but don't show anything that would confirm what happens one way or the other. I don't know. These are just some possible fixes that I came up with as I was writing the script, but and I'm not sure if they would stick 100%. I'm not sure if they would actually pan out as well as I imagine they would, but I have a feeling that almost anything, let's just say, almost anything would be better than what we ended up getting with Klondike 1932. And I don't know why, God, it was going so well. Did you guys notice that with the light? I hate my lighting. It's just like it, for whatever reason. It's like I finally get an angle that I enjoy. I finally got my pictures and stuff, and like the flag in the background and the teddy bears and everything. Like a nice setup with almost all of the lighting is great. But then this stupid thing, like this stupid, I think my laptop is auto focusing depending on how much I move. I think if I move certain ways or if I'm a certain distance away from the camera and the light and everything, it can't decide whether it wants to focus on the light or me, and it's just really annoying. It's like why does there always, I don't know. There's always a problem with something. There's always some issue somewhere, So it's just you guys, like, if you've never done it before, try making a video, like try making a YouTube video, try doing something like this. It's a lot harder than it seems. I guess it depends on what you're doing, but even basic shit like this is like, God, it's such a nightmare. I can't imagine doing it. I don't know. I can't imagine being able to make a living off of this, because it's like, oh, I just imagine all the complications when you have like a soundboard and like big like professional mics and professional cameras and stuff. Like, oh, geez, what a headache. Because that's what they say, right? Like the higher you try to aim, the harder it is, right? So let me just take another sip. I'm actually almost done with my mug. I normally don't finish my water, but I guess I was really thirsty. I've been talking up a storm this episode. But yeah. Lots to get to. It's just a shame that I have a feeling that the best part of this episode was like over an hour in, so I'm not sure if anyone will actually ever get to it, hear it. But yeah, I'll have to try to make my openings more entertaining, maybe. But it takes a while to get to these. Maybe I got to change the format altogether. But we'll see. We're playing around still. We're experimenting. This is all practice. So pretty much, it's the practice era. You know, it's not an official era. I wouldn't say era of channel history. Let's say. Because that's how I like to think of all of this, is that it's like history in the making, you know, and there are different eras depending on what you do. If you're a musician, if you're an artist, it's like each of your albums are probably going to be a different era for you as a creative, right? And so as a podcaster or as a YouTuber or whatever the hell kind of term you want to title you want to bestow upon me, you know, I guess this is like phase 0 almost, or like act 0, or yeah. The practice era, I guess. It doesn't feel real yet, but maybe it will if we keep doing it. I kind of like this episode, but I don't want to keep talking about it. You know, I just kind of want to stay focused on what we're focused on. So yeah, last few questions here. I would say this one went pretty well though. I'm kind of happy with it. Yeah, not as scared as I usually am. So that's good. I've gotten over most of the nerves, but it's just a matter of being able to say everything I want to say and not blank when I'm talking to the camera, because that's another big issue is being put on the feeling like you're being put on the spot and not being able to convey yourself as articulately, as smoothly as you would if you're just talking to your friends or your family behind the scenes, with not being, you know, unrecorded, no cameras, so on and so forth. It's not natural to be recorded, you know, so I think it makes sense. But there are some people who are able to pull it off. They have no issue with it, but I'm not one of those people, you know. That's probably why you don't have a lot of normal people on the internet, really, or on YouTube doing this kind of stuff. It's like a lot of the time they're arrogant or they're weird or whatever. So it's like I kind of wanted to, I don't know. Anyway, all of that, that's a whole other conversation for another day. Maybe for the first episode of the Imperial Roundtable, we'll get into some of that. But yeah, I'll shelf it for now. So just last couple questions for the discussion of the night. Favorite scenes and moments. What were some of my favorite scenes and moments? Well, I liked when Cromwell and Klondike, there's this scene where they make a sign together and they're kind of having fun. It's like, you know, pass me this, because they're doing it with like stamps, right? They're doing it with like lettered stamps that have, you know, like you stamp it, the stamp in the ink, you stamp the stamp on the board, and it's a letter. And so that's how they're spelling it out. They're making a sign, and yeah, like they're just like, it's very playful. It's like, they're just like, oh, pass me that block. It would, you know, they're like, oh, it would punch you in the face if you were punching you in the face. You're staring right at it. It's like it's hilarious. You know, it's not necessarily hilarious. It's nothing really, but it's just I just thought it was a charming little interaction, and I wish that was more of the movie. If that was if that was in more of the movie, then you would feel more attached to the characters and what's going on and everything like that. That's a good way to build an emotional connection, bridge between the audience and the actors and so on and so forth, right? But yeah, it didn't. The problem is that it didn't mean anything. It didn't mean much anyway within the context of the narrative. Because it wasn't earned, because the steps that they took in order to get there were bullshit. Really, it was cheap. It was lazy. So yeah, I don't know. You can't really get into it. And so there's that. And then I also kind of liked when Jim tried to kill Cromwell in the lab, and just because it was the only thing that approached an interesting scene throughout the film's entire runtime. But yeah, not much in the way of favorites with this one. And then in terms of least favorite scenes and moments, pretty much anything else that wasn't mentioned, that wasn't in those two scenes I just mentioned, basically. And then some of the film's pros or strengths, I would say, like I said earlier in the video, even though it was bad, it didn't feel dragged out or anything. An hour went by and I hardly noticed it. So at least they got the pacing down, I guess. And then some of the movie's cons or weaknesses, everything that wasn't the pacing pretty much. So there you go. And then any other thoughts, any other miscellaneous things that I didn't cover in any of the other categories of discussion. I don't know. I guess hopefully the next pre-code movie that we cover isn't as bad as this one was. That's all that really needs to be said. So here's to hoping. Cheers and all that. I did it. I think that's the first time on the channel's history that I've finished a complete mug of ice water during a recording. So that's cool. That's probably not cool. That probably means I'm dehydrated. So yeah. That's it though, guys. We're at the end of the video. And since we're at the end now, I guess I have more freedom to kind of kick back and relax and talk to you guys about other things real quick. Just a little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of reflection and all that. Because like I said, these are practice, so I can kind of do whatever I want, right? It doesn't matter. Could go anywhere. Just like the pre-code Hollywood movies. It's like, could go anywhere you want. Like, and you never know what to expect. It's all possible. But yeah, all in all, I think this was a pretty good review. I wish that I had been able to. I almost wonder if I should like introduce or I should preview what I'm going to talk about at the very beginning of the episode, so that people have something, like they have a hook. I don't know if I necessarily have a hook, because I just start talking about like what happens in the movie, and I'm not sure if these have any like general appeal. You know what I mean? Because these are reviews about very specific things. And because they're reviews, like I'm just talking about the movie, I'm not sure if people would watch these for me, the host. I'm not sure if it's the kind of thing, the kind of content that people would watch for the host or the personality. It might just be more like, if I want to hear someone talk about this very specific movie, I'll click on it. That seems to be the basis that a lot of people, that the people who do watch my content, watch my videos and what I put out, that seems to be what they do at the moment. So I would like to, that's why I really think it's important to start working on launching the Imperial Roundtable series, because that's a talk show. That's a talk podcast. That's about the personalities. That's about just hanging out, having conversation, talking, not being confined or limited to just one specific thing. But I feel like I do these reviews. This whole channel started out as just a personal vanity project for myself, for me. You know, it was literally just a way for me to improve my speaking, because I'm very, I was very shy, and I still am very, very shy and uncomfortable behind a camera. And I tend to not be as well spoken when I'm in front of it as I am behind it. And so I wanted to work on that, because you never know. Maybe someday I'll want to do a podcast as, like when I'm a working adult. Like maybe I'll just do it in my downtime with friends, just as a nice way to blow off steam and be productive and enjoy myself, and have that sort of creative outlet. So while in order to prepare for that, I might as well have some years of experience behind me. And if everything goes according to plan, I would really like to do this for the rest of my life, honestly. Like I would like to always have the YouTube channel or a podcast or something similar, something like this in my life, because I feel like it gives me a lot of satisfaction, and it makes it so that, if as long as I do an episode of Coffee with Holden, or an episode of Imperial Tides, or an episode of something like Imperial Roundtable, anything like that, if I do something like that at least once a day, then the day has not been a total waste of time. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I see it. That's the mindset I have when I approach this sort of thing. And hopefully I won't ever get to a point where I'm just so exhausted by the other circumstances of my life, whether that be my job or my relationships or whatever, or just technological limitations or whatever. Like, I hope none of that becomes an issue. I hope that I will always be able to do this, because it really is something that I get a lot out of. Even if you guys, as the audience, or the hypothetical viewers don't get anything out of it, it's something that's very intrinsic to me. And I hope that eventually we can get to a point where we build a small community, because like I said at the end of the last review, actually, one of my goals here is to build up a community, even if it's just a community within the context of like, well, I had a lot of fun doing this with my fellow hosts and stuff, even that sort of community would be fine. Like I'll take that, but that's all in the distant future, but we're starting to take more steps towards realizing it, making it a thing. So hopefully it will eventually become a material reality, but only time will tell. And that's pretty much it. We've come to the end of our episode of Coffee with Holden for tonight. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And stay tuned for more episodes of Coffee with Holden and Imperial Tides, and hopefully very soon Imperial Roundtable. And take care, and bye for now.